So many people are reporting that they are feeling off lately. Like there would be some kind of tension in the air. The sense that something's off. Like we've reached the edge of an invisible cliff and there's no going back. This isn't just a personal crisis that you're going through. It's a shift in the system. The system, the simulation, the matrix that is collapsing right in front of our eyes. And what comes next depends on how much of your soul you're willing to reclaim. So let me explain everything. The matrix isn't just technology. It's not just social media or the economy. It's a psychic control system, a distortion field. It's the programming that taught you to obey, conform, consume, stay afraid, stay divided. But this web didn't start with modern governments or banks. Its roots go far deeper into ancient human history. There was a time long ago when the earth was seeded with pure multidimensional consciousness. But as humanity evolved and different energy entered the picture, some call them archons, others reptilians. They're not, some kind of monsters in suits like some people imagine. They're called non-empathic consciousness, one that feeds on control, hierarchy, and separation. These beings, or rather this frequency, infiltrated early power structures and taught humanity how to dominate, colonize, and suppress. They embedded themselves through bloodlines, belief systems, and trauma. And for thousands of years, they maintained control, not through war, but through thought, through fear, through shame, through illusion. But even they knew it wouldn't last forever. And now, something strange is happening. Because their grip is weakening. Because human consciousness is changing. The frequency of the energy on planet Earth, the pure, the coherent energy, is rising. And the signals of that are everywhere. You may notice that time feels distorted. You may notice sudden exhaustion, emotional purging, systematic instability. All jobs are falling apart, relationships are dissolving. People are leaving cities, questioning authority, and feeling like nothing makes sense anymore. It's not a chaos that is happening, it's a detox. You're not broken if you're feeling that. You're waking up. And the matrix, it's short-circuiting. The frequency fence that held humanity down is full of holes right now. And for the first time in lifetimes, your soul can finally breathe. And that's why you feel so strange. But even now, the old system has one final trick: to trap you in your own mind. It wants to make you believe that nothing matters, that it's all too late, that you're powerless, too sensitive, too small. That's the reptilian matrix at work. Not in the sky, not in the shadows, but in your own thinking. The real matrix isn't outside, it's the program inside that says, stay in survival, don't trust your intuition, don't believe in love. That's how it wins, not by force, but by convincing you to betray yourself. But here is the code. The moment you see the program, you're no longer controlled by it. And when you feel beyond it, you collapse it. So let's be clear. Reptilians are not sci-fi. They represent a frequency band, one that is anti-life, anti-emotion, anti-creation. A parasitic consciousness that attaches to human systems based on fear, status, control and disconnection. It's the voice that says dominate or be dominated, logic over intuition, control love or lose it. This frequency lives in corporate structures, authoritarian politics, even distorted spiritual teachings, but it cannot survive in higher heart coherence, truth, and grounded presence. Which means you don't fight this consciousness by waging war, you dissolve it by living from soul, which means you learn the art of heart coherence, brain coherence. You teach your body how coherent energy feels like so you can embody it and live it in your daily life. You kind of become an example of coherent energy, which means your lifestyle will change, your outlook will change, the way you treat others will change, and that's how you start paving a new way of a change maker. Because a sovereign human connected to their own inner source is unhackable. So, what is really happening? The false structures are dying, and the earth is entering a higher octave of reality. You're not witnessing the end of the world, but the end of a simulation. The matrix built on separation cannot follow you where you are going consciously, because the next timeline is not made of control, it's made of coherence. That's why coherent energy is the only energy that will speak to you the most, and you will feel the most attracted to it. In coherence we find communities that are heart-based, we find clarity, and we find creativity. This is triple C, right? Community, clarity, and creativity. This is a timeline where energy comes before effort, where inner alignment manifests faster than external hustle, where truth, not strategy, is the ultimate currency. Many people are asking during this process, like, what is my role in this? So here's the answer. Do not try to fix the old world. Do not try to fight it. It was never designed for your soul. Instead, build a new one by becoming the new one. Practice heart-brain coherence or any other practice that puts you into a coherent state, and see what inspires you there, because that energy will speak uniquely to you. Withdraw your energy from drama, division, and fear. Stop giving your life force to systems that don't honor it, and start creating it from your own frequency. You don't need a title, you don't need a plan, you just need to get clear inside, inner clarity, because the more of us that unplug, the faster it falls. So what does it mean? It means that you find your own clarity on what would be a fulfilling life to you, what would be a life of freedom to you, what would be a life of joy, of awe, of reverence. Ask yourself where you've lost it. Like, where people have lost this reverence for nature, wonder for life and for the future, love for the future. Like, so many people live fear-based, thinking about how tomorrow will happen, while we could actually envision tomorrow and live our lives according to our vision, be inspired by a vision. That's what it means. So yes, the matrix is collapsing, but it will not look like that, because it will try to trick you like it's all fine. It will try to pull you into a constant distraction, into doom scrolling, and it will feed you with information it wants you to know. That's why it's so important to gain your own sovereignty, to take your power back and stop feeding with your attention things, sources, information that don't make your life better. That's why it's so important to know, okay, what would make my life the best? What would make my life the way that I will thrive, that I will feel free, that I will feel in love with life and start doing these things. That's why so many people are moving from cities into nature. That's why so many people are going off the grid or are completely changing their careers. People are becoming artists once again. People are starting doing what they love. It's not an easy shift, and it was never meant to be easy, but it's very necessary. It's not about doing something you hear from someone else that will free you. It's about finding your own voice of clarity and following it. Notice how old beliefs are dying, how old programs are glitching, and maybe that feeling you've had for years that you were here for something more. It's true. Don't ignore it, my friend. You didn't come to save the world. You came to remember yourself. And in doing so, you will set others free. You will notice that this is it. This is the reset, the remember. The matrix is over, my friend, and the mission is now becoming present with your own voice of clarity and follow it. I hope you found great value today, my friend. If yes, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, because every single day I'm bringing you new messages that can help you to focus on what truly matters. And I hope you've enjoyed in today's painting as well. I'm an artist and I'm bringing you these messages together with my art, because art can help you to open your mind and become creative as you're watching this process, and a message can open your heart and remind you of what truly matters. So I'm seeing visions in my mind's eye, and that's why I'm painting them. That's why I'm doing all of that. So I channel this art that can activate you in ways that will shift you and inspire you. To anyone who would like to get a print of today's painting, go onto attractpassion.com or the link in the description of this video and find all of my art there. See which one resonates with you, because that may give you something that you need. Let me know which one speaks to you the most, and by buying my art, you're also supporting this mission. Another way you can support this channel is joining our Patreon community, where I share more exclusive content, guided meditations, courses, and so much more. And another way you can support this channel is by joining our YouTube membership. Thank you so much for your support. You are incredible. I love you all, my friends. And till next time, one love.
Put your soul consider.
Job's done.
Shall know my cruelty firsthand.
Anduin versus Anduin.
The light shall bring victory. Light smiles upon the just. You have been.
Has your soul been bruised by a betrayal by somebody who was close to you? Ending a bad
You know, let's look together at something that I think you will find interesting, and we'll finish it up next week. We'll kind of look at the human mind, how your mind has been programmed.
Shall bring victory.
I was watching television yesterday, and I turned on a religious program, and I was watching a Dr. Kennedy, James Kennedy. Come on, send your chair's waiting for you here. I was watching Dr. James Kennedy, and he was talking about the New Age, and he had a lot of problems with it. He said, because he said it is really taking up with psychology, and as a result he was insinuating that when you get involved with psychology you kind of come against Christianity, which is true. And what he said really shocked me. First of all, he's a very distinguished looking man. He's an eloquent speaker, beautiful speaker. He has a magnificent church setting with everything that, you know, it just had credibility all over it. I mean, it was a magnificently beautiful place. But what I saw there actually was I saw people being programmed. Because what he said was this, he says, you know, a lot of these people today in this psychology, they'll say to you that you are gods. And as such, he said, the problem is, where does this originate from, the fact that you are God? He says it originates from Satan. He says Satan was the first one to say you are gods. And he said to Adam and Eve, if you'll do this, you will be like God.
Quickly.
And so he says that this type of a thing which brings psychology together and gets people to think that they have this position as God is from Satan. And so then I thought, well, gee, you know, this guy is really a credible speaker. He's extremely distinguished, has all the credentials from all of the great universities. He's speaking in this magnificent place with all of the surroundings. And very few of those people were ever going to look really into a Bible to check anything. And so they all walked out of there with their minds programmed that this philosophy of believing that you are God is satanic. He had done this, and he had to do this in order to protect the system. He has to do this in order to protect the traditional system of religion. But what I want you to do, I want you to open those little Bibles that I've given, or that you have out here, and I want you to open to page 876. And if you open to page 876, the rest of you go to the book of John. And I want you to look at something in there that Reverend Kennedy, in all of his eloquence, failed to note. And this is John chapter 10, okay? John chapter 10. And if you go with me, you'll go to verse 34. And there you'll see the words of Jesus Christ. And what does he say? Is it not written in your law, I said, you are gods? And if he called them gods unto whom the word of God came, the scripture cannot be broken. So it wasn't Satan who said you are gods. It's Jesus Christ who said you are gods. But the eloquent Christian preacher on television with thousands, millions of people watching him,
I must move quickly.
So, you always feel stupid in a room that does not value you. You will never feel accepted in a room that does not understand your worth. And the reason that I'm talking about this today, and the reason that I'm saying this is because I just got back from the fucking mechanic. And it was an awful experience, and let me just tell you, and let me tell you what's been going on. My car has been making a weird sound every time I go to brake, and I don't like it. And I don't know shit about cars. So I asked my friend who knows more about cars than I do, like, what's wrong? Evaluate. He's like, your brake fluid looks awful, so you're gonna need to get that bled and replaced. I'm like, awesome. I go to the mechanic. I'm like, okay, hey, I need to get my brakes bled. I walk on in the store, trusting and open and excited to get my brakes bled. I walk up to the counter and I say, can I get my brakes bled? And he's like, sure, we can do that for you. And he said, do you need your brake pads checked? And I said, no, I don't need those. I got those replaced a year ago. They're fine. He said, okay. They go out. Maybe 5 minutes later, they come back, which I think is a little bit short to get your brakes bled, which I specifically asked for because the brake fluid is very dark. And he says, so we checked your brake pads. Red flag number 1. And your brake pads look fine, so you're all good to go. What about the brake fluid? What about that dark stuff that's swimming around in there? What about that? And he's like, oh, we can check that. So, could you? It's like, yeah, I'll go have him check that. And then this dude grabs my keys, goes out to his car, goes back maybe 30 seconds later, which is not nearly enough time. And he says, okay, sweetheart, your fluid looks fine. It even looks a little bit too full. Did you put some in there yourself? And I said, didn't look a little dark to you? He said, no, that's a good color for it. Okay, I leave the store. I'm not arguing with stupid. Clearly this room and the people in this room don't see what is wrong with my car. The fluid is very dark. The fluid is so dark that my friend was concerned for me to even drive to the mechanic with fluid that dark. Because I don't know shit about cars. I didn't know you were supposed to check the brake fluid. I didn't know shit about brake fluid. I fucked up there. Cool, right? So can you fix it? You can't. Apparently you're stupid. Apparently there are a whole bunch of room of elementary school kids. So I get back in my car and I'm like, this is a problem. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to another mechanic. And I pulled up to a mechanic like 30 minutes before they closed, and I felt so bad about it. And I'm like, hey, I'm really sorry that you guys are about to close. I don't need you to fix it today. I just want you to look at my brakes and my brake fluid, and I need you to tell me what's wrong. And they're like, okay. And I'm like, don't ask questions you don't want to know the answer to. Just look at my brake fluid, please. Just do that evaluation, please. And they're like, okay, ma'am. Damn, okay. And they open up my hood, and 3 grown-ass men audibly gasped at the color of my brake fluid. And I was like, yep, that sounds about right. And they're like, yeah, that's really dark. And I'm like, I know, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were supposed to replace it. The people at the other place said it was fine, and they said they should be fired from life. Anyway, wow, okay, awesome. So, and they're gonna replace all of this tomorrow morning because they said, we're scared to even have you drive home on this, but we're closed, we can't do this today. And they asked, how far away do you live? And I said, maybe like 5 minutes, not long. And they said, that's good. You should be able to drive it home and then drive it back here, and it should be okay. And I said, should be okay? Are you kidding me? Vent over. But what I'm trying to say is that I went to an environment that one immediately saw me as just a stupid woman walking in there knowing nothing about cars, which I am. And I know there's something wrong with my brakes, and you're not going to convince me that there isn't. I also don't know shit about cars, so they were correct in their assumption that I was sweetheart and I did not know what I was talking about, but I know something's wrong. They didn't care. They were perfectly fine having me drive on out of there with that car. The second I take it to people who actually cared about me, actually wanted to do their job, actually wanted to make sure that I drove out of there okay, didn't sweetheart me, made sure I was okay, immediately booked me an appointment for the next morning to get everything fixed, I was valued. Even though I don't know shit about cars, I deserve the decency of empathy and compassion. But I left that first mechanic, and I almost didn't drive to the second. I was like, okay, fine, maybe I'm the idiot. Maybe I'm the idiot. Maybe I'm not feeling anything under my brakes. And instead of evaluating them and saying, no, I know what my friends saw. I did research on this on the internet. I know that there's something wrong with this, and I need you to do your job. I didn't argue with them. They had already not valued me. They already...
Was a boy once, Eli. He wasn't born broken. He wasn't born angry or lost. No, he started off the same as anyone. A child with wonder in his eyes, always asking why and dreaming in colors. But the world didn't care about that boy. Not in the way he needed. His father would come home late, loud and full of rage. His mother would disappear into silence. He learned to tiptoe through the house, memorizing every creak in the floorboards like landmines. The dinner table was a war zone, words thrown like knives, and no one ever said sorry. But what damaged Eli wasn't just the trauma. It was the denial of it, the pretending, the forced smiles in public, the way no one ever said, hey, something's wrong here. That gaslighting of reality itself became the poison. You see, a human mind is resilient, but it's not invincible. Trauma doesn't just sit in memory, it embeds in the body, it warps the nervous system, it rewires how someone sees the world, others, and most tragically, themselves. It teaches a child that they are not safe, not worthy, not real. And over time, that child grows. The mask grows with him. Eli became charming, funny. He learned how to read people, to shape-shift into whatever they needed. He became a master at it, and yet, underneath, he was empty, hollow, like a room abandoned after a fire, walls still standing but the soul gone. That's what unprocessed trauma does. It splits the self. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." Eli inherited that tragedy, not just in genetics, but in the silence, in the suppression, in the cold legacy of emotional neglect. He didn't go crazy in a flash. It started with the insomnia, the feeling that something was always wrong, even when everything seemed fine. Then came the paranoia, the rage, the self-hatred. He couldn't trust anyone, not even himself. Relationships turned into landmines. He'd push people away and then beg them to stay. Love became a battlefield where he played both soldier and saboteur. He tried therapy once, told the therapist he couldn't feel anything anymore, that his dreams didn't make sense, that sometimes he would look in the mirror and not recognize the man staring back. They told him it was anxiety, depression, but labels couldn't touch the real monster, the buried pain he never learned to speak. Because when trauma is ignored, it doesn't disappear. It hides, it festers, it waits. And one day, it comes out. Maybe in a breakdown, maybe in addiction, maybe in the sudden silence of someone who used to laugh the loudest. Eli began talking to himself, not just random thoughts, but conversations, arguments, screams. He'd walk past mirrors without blinking. He started carrying a notebook, scribbling thoughts that made no sense to anyone else. Friends said he changed, but the truth, he was always like this. He just ran out of energy to hide it. That's what no one tells you about going crazy. It's not madness, it's exhaustion. It's the soul giving up the performance. When a person has spent their whole life suppressing their wounds, their fears, their trauma, eventually the psyche fractures, because the human mind is not a machine. It's a fragile tapestry of memories, emotions, beliefs, and meaning. When too much of that tapestry is soaked in pain and silence, it begins to tear. Eli started believing the voices, started seeing symbols in places that made no sense. He called it patterns. He thought the universe was speaking to him directly, not metaphorically, literally. Every radio ad, every glance from a stranger, every flicker of light in a hallway became a message. What was really happening? His mind, starved of order, was creating meaning in the chaos. It was trying to make sense of what had never been resolved. That's the cruel trick of unresolved trauma. It doesn't let you rest. It doesn't let you forget. It disguises itself as anxiety, anger, even mystical insight. But behind all of it is a child screaming, "Please, notice me, save me, help me." But by then, it's too late. Because the world doesn't understand madness. It fears it. It turns it into a spectacle. And Eli, like so many others, became another cautionary tale, another statistic, another what went wrong. He didn't go crazy because he was weak. He went crazy because he was strong for too long. Some call it madness, but Carl Jung had another word for it. Individuation, the process of becoming whole by facing the dark, chaotic parts of the self. But for someone like Eli, it didn't feel noble. It felt like drowning, like being pulled into the depths of something ancient and terrifying. Something that didn't speak in words, but symbols, fragments, screams behind closed doors. Because here's the truth. You don't just lose your mind one day. It happens slowly, like a soft crack in a mirror that spiderwebs over time. From the outside, they might say, he just snapped. But they didn't see what happened before. The parts that weren't loud, the nights that were silent, the moments no one else was there for. When you bury the past, you don't kill it, you multiply it. Unhealed trauma becomes a ghost, and ghosts don't die, they haunt. Eli wasn't just dealing with memories, he was carrying the entire emotional weight of years of abandonment, confusion, shame, and unspoken grief. Every moment he stayed silent as a child, those moments screamed back at him as an adult. This is where the line between sanity and insanity begins to blur. In psychology, we often talk about the false self, the version of you created to survive. Not to live, not to thrive, just to survive. This false self wears masks, tells people what they want to hear, and buries the truth so deep that even you forget it's there. But that truth doesn't forget you. One day, the mask cracks. The persona can't hold the weight anymore, and when it shatters, what's left? Just the shadow. The side you never wanted to meet. The rage you said wasn't yours. The grief you claimed didn't matter. The voice inside you that whispered, you were never loved the way you needed to be. This is what going crazy really is. It's not an illness. It's not demonic. It's not even irrational. It's the human psyche breaking under the weight of pretending. Madness is the soul's protest. It's the scream of a mind that has been silenced for too long. And in a strange way, it's also a chance. Because when everything collapses, when the lies fall away, when the mask shatters, when the world no longer makes sense, you're finally left with the one thing that might save you, the truth. But it's not pretty. Eli's truth was this. He was abused, he was neglected, he was never seen for who he really was. And for years he told himself it didn't matter. But it did. It always did. Carl Jung believed that healing begins when the unconscious is made conscious, that the very act of looking at your darkness, not running from it, is the beginning of redemption. But here's the hard part. Looking at your past means feeling everything you worked so hard not to feel. And that's terrifying, because beneath the numbness, beneath the madness, is something even scarier, vulnerability. To go into your shadow, you must become soft again. You must grieve, and grief is a kind of death. Eli began to write, and not for clarity, not even for healing,
Job's done.
just to get it out. The pages were chaotic, scribbles, drawings, sometimes just the same sentence repeated 50 times. I didn't deserve this. That sentence changed him, not because it gave him peace, but because it gave him permission. Permission to finally be angry, to be sad, to feel. And in that, he found something he hadn't touched in years: hope. Healing doesn't begin with motivation or a positive mindset. It begins with honesty, and honesty begins in pain. Eli began therapy again, but this time he didn't try to be impressive. He didn't try to be smart or spiritual. He just wept for everything. For the child who grew up too fast, for the adult who never felt safe, for the madness that made sense once he stopped running from it. He wasn't cured, but he wasn't lost anymore. He learned that madness was never the enemy. It was a message, a cry for attention from the parts of himself that had been locked away. And when he finally opened the door, those parts didn't attack him. They thanked him, because now he was finally listening. If you've ever felt like you're going crazy, if the world feels too loud and you feel too broken, know this: you're not broken. You're buried, and healing is not becoming someone new. It's remembering who you were before the pain taught you to forget. How do you begin? Start with silence. Not the numb silence of disconnection, but the sacred silence of listening. Write, scream, walk, cry, but do it consciously. Do it without shame. Read books that go beyond symptoms, books that dive into the unconscious. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert A. Johnson. The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller. Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. These aren't just books, they are mirrors. They won't give you answers, but they will give you permission to ask the real questions. And most of all, don't heal to be perfect. Heal so you can be real. So you can look at the mirror and recognize the one looking back. Because the world doesn't need more masks. It needs more people who have survived their shadow and come back with light. He sits on the edge of the playground, not because he is lonely, but because something else is happening inside him. The swings blur in the background like slow-moving planets. Voices rise and fall. The world is loud and busy, and he is listening, not in order to reply, but to understand. There is a whole life existing behind his quiet. It is an interior life, rich with observation, small rituals, private experiments, and long, solemn questions that no one has asked him. People confuse quiet with absence. They measure presence by volume, by the speed of replies, by how fast someone can perform on demand. But the quiet child is not empty. They are deep. They are a reservoir. From the outside, silence looks like distance. From the inside, it is careful cultivation. And that difference between how it looks and how it feels is the beginning of everything we misunderstand about being quiet. Why does a child choose silence? Sometimes it is temperament. Some children are born with nervous systems that prefer low stimulation. They find stillness restful. Other times, silence grows as a defense. In households where speaking up brought criticism, where emotion was inconvenient, a young mind learned to self-soothe by withdrawing. In classrooms that reward speed and participation, quietness is treated like a defect rather than a gift. Yet neither temperament nor survival strategy tells the whole story. The quiet child often contains a paradox, intensely social in their way, but cautious in the ways the rest of the world demands social engagement. The quiet child sees patterns. While others rush to be heard, they notice who is left out, the micro moments of hurt, the way a teacher's smile changes when someone misses a question. Listening is their craft. They collect impressions like stones. Later, those stones become metaphors, sentences, inventions, music, the untouched material of creativity. Think of the poets and the scientists who began as watchers rather than talkers. In silence, they learned to accumulate nuance. In silence, they tested the textures of the world before making a move. And yet, silence is fragile. It lives in a social economy that prizes performance and immediacy. The quiet child frequently internalizes a single corrosive message: you must be louder to be loved. So they adapt. Some mask, learning to mimic the extroverted scripts they see on stage or in life. Masking is energy draining. It makes the inside grow colder. Others react by withdrawing further, convinced that the world will never slow down enough to meet them. What begins as a strategy for safety becomes a lifelong negotiation between self and expectation. There is also a moral subtlety here. Quiet children are often assumed to be well-behaved, obedient, easy. Adults relax, but easy is not the same as nurtured. A child who does not demand attention may not be getting it. In schools and families, attention is sometimes allocated not by need, but by volume. The child who shouts their need gets it first. The child who whispers waits. Those long waits accumulate. They are small debits on the heart's ledger that, over time, compound into a certain entitlement of silence, expecting less, asking less, believing that one's needs are optional. This is where the psychology curls inward. Quietness can be a chapel and a prison. The chapel is where reflection breeds insight. The prison is where self-erasure becomes habit. The quiet child learns to interpret their own voice as risky. They rehearse the sentences they wish they could say, and then decide not to say them. They become fluent in apology as a form of preemptive protection. Sorry, I don't mean to bother, before they've even spoken. Over time, the apology becomes an identity, a way to survive under the assumption that their presence is an imposition. And yet, there is a power in that apology. Quiet people, when they finally speak, tend to be heard. Their words are like dated coins. They spend carefully, and because they are rare, they are noticed. But being noticed does not automatically translate to being understood. The quiet person's language is often indirect, symbolic, or slow. Modern conversation favors the immediate retort, the zippy comment. When someone offers a slow, considered thought, the group may fail to catch the thread. The quiet child then learns to compress themselves, to make their words smaller, to fit into the group's tempo. What might help us rethink this dynamic is to consider silence as not a problem to be fixed, but a quality to be respected. Silence is a different mode of engagement. It is not passive, it is patient. It holds back the rush of judgment. It allows complexity to breathe. Imagine a world in which we value the slow responder as much as the quick one. Imagine meetings where the first 10 seconds were intentionally left unfilled to give the quiet mind time to articulate something original. Most of our social architectures, classrooms, open plan offices, team meetings, are designed for immediacy, not depth. The quiet child is often living in a world constructed against their most natural rhythm. There is another dimension we must address: the pain of misframing. The quiet child who internalizes messages becomes as hard on themselves as the world is silent toward them. They measure their value against the noise around them and find themselves wanting. They may assume that their introspection is a defect, that their long silences are a symptom of brokenness. In adolescence, as peers form identity around visibility, social media profiles, likes, shout-outs, the quiet teen can feel increasingly out of step. The interiority that once felt rich now appears like a liability. The covert self begins to seek permission to be seen, an unspoken, aching request that says, "You may look, but do you know what to see?" Sometimes the quiet child becomes an adult who exploits their own invisibility. They work in the background, take on supporting roles, and keep their ambitions small, not because they lack capability, but because they were never taught to take up space. And yet, in other cases, the quiet child's interior life becomes a fuel for leadership of a different kind. There is a leadership born of observation, a leader who listens first, who models patience, who sees the shy person in the room and makes space for them. The quiet person's capacity to hold complexity can become a profound resource in any community that learns to appreciate it. How then do we care for the quiet child? The first step is to validate without demanding performance, to welcome the child's slow replies instead of filling the silence on their behalf, to ask open-ended questions that allow them to explore rather than interrogate, to give them roles that require contemplation rather than spectacle. The recorder of ideas, the curator of projects, the observer who draws maps of group dynamics. These roles do not corner them into being less social. They honor their modality and give them pathways to contribute meaningfully. We also need to teach the quiet child skills for translation, how to turn their rich inner life into accessible expressions when needed. This is not about forcing extroversion. It is about giving tools, small rehearsals before social events, templates for starting conversations, signals they can use when they need time to formulate a response. Imagine teaching a child to say, "I'm processing, give me 5 minutes," as a normal part of social interaction. That 5-minute rule would transform how we regard the rhythm of thought and speech. There is a philosophical lesson here too. In an era that confuses speed for wisdom, quietness is a corrective. It reminds us that thought is not speech, and listening is not silence. The quiet child is an invitation to slow down, to consider, to notice. Their presence asks a deeper question. What does it mean to be fully present without dominating? How do we design societies that reward depth rather than spectacle? Yet, none of this eliminates the real vulnerabilities. The quiet child is more likely to be overlooked in evaluations, to be bypassed for leadership roles, to be misdiagnosed as disengaged. The stakes are high. Without conscious intervention, the quiet child can adopt a narrative of invisibility, a belief that their voice is not necessary, and that belief, once in place, can shape a life. At the edge of this conversation is a kind of quiet revolution waiting to happen. What if we reimagine classrooms, workplaces, and families so that the quiet voice had both protection and projection? What if the slow thinker was given the first chance to speak precisely because they need it most? What would happen if our cultural default were to assume depth instead of drama? These are not theoretical questions, they are practical ones, and the answers shape destinies. The child under the maple tree, the one who watches the swings and listens for the slow drum of meaning, can be guided into adulthood that recognizes their gift rather than punishes it. They can be taught to translate, to assert gently, to find companions who prefer conversation that unfolds, and to inhabit space without shouting. There is a paradox that returns like a tide. The quieter you are, the more room you make for others to be loud. But the louder the world becomes, the more essential the quiet becomes. So the question is not how to make the quiet louder, it is how to make the world listen. And that has everything to do with rethinking value, attention, and the very architecture of our shared spaces. If you find yourself in this quiet, know this: your silence is not a deficit. It is a malleable strength. It can be armor, prison, or sanctuary, depending on how you treat it. The path forward is not to erase the quiet, but to learn how to steward it, to let it be both refuge and instrument, both safe harbor and loudspeaker when necessary. There is a way for the quiet to teach the loud how to listen, and for the loud to teach the quiet how to be seen. The bridge between these modes is practice, patience, and the willingness to reshape the expectations we inherit. Stay with that thought for a moment. There is more to uncover: how the quiet translate into different adult archetypes, how silence intersects with creativity and leadership, and the practical rituals a quiet person can adopt to thrive without becoming someone they are not. Still, there's a hidden struggle in being the quiet one. He is constantly underestimated. Teachers overlook him for leadership roles. Friends forget to invite him to plans because they assume he wouldn't want to come. In group conversations, his ideas are ignored until someone else says the same thing louder, and suddenly it's brilliant. It's a strange kind of invisibility. one that can make you feel like you're both present and absent at the same time. And yet, in that invisibility, there is freedom. The quiet kid can move through life without the constant performance others feel trapped in. He can observe without being observed. He can learn without the pressure to constantly prove himself. This is why so many quiet kids develop rich inner lives. They have the space to think deeply, to feel deeply, to dream without interruption. But here's the paradox. The same silence that protects him can also isolate him. People can mistake his stillness for disinterest, his shyness for arrogance, his boundaries for walls. This misreading can cut deep, especially when you want to connect but don't know how to bridge the gap between your inner world and the noise outside. And so many quiet kids live with a quiet ache, a longing for someone to understand without them having to explain. There's also a reason why so many quiet kids grow into thinkers, writers, artists, and innovators. They've spent years watching the world without constantly participating in it, which means they've had time to actually understand it. They know how people move when they think no one's watching. They see the flaws in the systems everyone else takes for granted. They recognize patterns before they become obvious, and in their own way, they begin to shape the world, not through noise, but through precision. Still, the quiet kid's journey isn't without danger. Silence can turn into self-erasure if it's born from fear instead of choice. If you've been told your voice doesn't matter enough times, you might start to believe it. If you've been dismissed every time you try to speak, you might stop trying altogether. And over time, the quiet kid might start to hide not just his voice, but parts of himself. But the truth is, quietness isn't about being less. It's about being more observant, more thoughtful, more deliberate. The quiet kid doesn't need to shout to make an impact. He doesn't need to be the center of attention to influence the room. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who doesn't fight to be heard, because he knows that true influence isn't about volume, it's about presence. And perhaps that's the quiet kid's greatest gift. While the rest of the world is busy reacting, he's busy understanding. While others are speaking just to fill the silence, he's holding his words until they matter. And in a world drowning in noise, the one who can sit in stillness and listen is the one who sees the clearest. Because sometimes the quiet kid isn't just watching the world, he's studying it. And one day, when the moment is right, he will speak, and the world will wish it had listened sooner.
I see you've brought guests.
Sarah sat at the mahogany table, watching the familiar theatre unfold before her. The conversation flowed like a carefully choreographed dance. Weather, vacations, the latest Netflix series everyone was binge-watching. Laughter erupted at predetermined moments. Heads nodded in synchronized approval, and the comfortable rhythm of small talk filled the air like background music.
For you and your guest.
But Sarah heard something else beneath the surface symphony. She heard the tremor in Michael's voice when he mentioned his promotion, the way it betrayed his fear of failure. She noticed how Jennifer's eyes darted away when someone asked about her marriage, how her smile tightened just slightly at the corners. She felt the weight of David's silence, the way he retreated into himself whenever the conversation turned to success and ambition. The others seemed oblivious to these subtle undercurrents, content to skim across the surface of human interaction like stones skipping on water. But Sarah dove deep with every glance, every pause, every carefully chosen word. She couldn't help herself. It was as if she possessed some invisible antenna that picked up frequencies others couldn't hear. When the conversation turned to current events, Sarah felt something stir within her. Here was a chance for substance, for meaning, for the kind of dialogue that fed her soul. She leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of genuine curiosity and concern. Isn't it fascinating how we're all so connected through technology, yet loneliness rates have never been higher? I was reading about how social media creates this paradox of connection and isolation simultaneously. It makes me wonder, are we really connecting with each other, or are we just performing connection? Sarah felt the familiar sting of rejection, the invisible force field that seemed to surround her words whenever she tried to venture beyond the surface. She smiled politely and retreated into herself, carrying the weight of her unspoken thoughts like stones in her pockets. This is the story of the deep thinker, not a fairy tale of misunderstood genius, but a raw, honest exploration of what it means to see clearly in a world that prefers the comfort of blindness. It's the story of those who cannot help but feel deeply, think critically, and question constantly in a society that rewards conformity and punishes authenticity.
Come closer. You can trust me.
Now you let my heart torn in two. So now you let my nights cold and blue. Love is fake, but none hurt like you.
Remain seated. Come on,
Rain on my soul, your shadow won't part. Rain on my soul, it drowns my heart. Suddenly you left a wound that won't start.
Come closer. You can trust me.
Diamond waves like my tears in the dark. Steel drum sides where you left your mark. Chicago streets crown my world falls apart.
Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who spent his life mapping the hidden territories of the human psyche, understood this phenomenon intimately. He wrote, "The more intelligent and self-aware a person is, the more they suffer from the general unconsciousness of society. This isn't a badge of honor, it's a warning, a recognition of the beautiful burden carried by those who cannot unsee what they have seen."
The ghost I keep. Soon your heart breaks. My endless weight.
The architecture of alienation. What makes a deep thinker? Is it intelligence, sensitivity, some cruel twist of fate that condemns certain individuals to a life of perpetual outsiderhood? The answer is far more complex and fascinating than you might imagine. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher who famously declared that God is dead, understood the profound loneliness that comes with seeing through society's comfortable illusions. He wrote about the free spirit, those individuals who had broken free from the chains of conventional thinking, but now found themselves wandering in a wilderness of their own making. These free spirits, Nietzsche argued, were essential for human progress, but they paid a heavy price for their liberation. The deep thinker's journey often begins in childhood, in those formative moments when other children accept the world as it appears, while some ask the questions that make adults uncomfortable. Why do grown-ups say one thing and do another? Why do we have to pretend to be happy when we're not? Why does love sometimes feel conditional? Why do the rules seem arbitrary? These children learn quickly that their questions are unwelcome. They're told to stop overthinking, to just accept things as they are, to be more like the other kids. But the questions don't stop. They simply go underground, growing more complex and urgent with each passing year. Arthur Schopenhauer, the pessimistic philosopher who influenced both Nietzsche and Jung, observed that most people are like hedgehogs trying to keep warm in winter. They huddle together for comfort, but if they get too close, they prick each other with their spines. The deep thinker often feels like a hedgehog, with particularly sharp spines, desperate for connection, but seemingly destined to wound those who come too close. But here's what makes this phenomenon even more intriguing. Deep thinkers aren't just intellectually different, they're neurologically different. Neuroscientist Dr. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive people reveals that approximately 20% of the population has a more sensitive nervous system, processing information more deeply and being more aware of subtleties in their environment. These individuals, whom she calls highly sensitive persons, or HSPS, often overlap significantly with what we might call deep thinkers. The deep thinker's brain literally works differently. They notice details others miss, pick up on emotional subtleties, and process information more thoroughly. In a world that rewards quick decisions and surface-level interactions, this depth of processing can feel like a disability rather than a gift. Consider the workplace, where the deep thinker's need for meaning and authenticity crashes against corporate culture's demand for efficiency and conformity. While others can compartmentalize their values and just do the job, the deep thinker struggles with tasks that feel meaningless or ethically questionable. They're the ones who ask uncomfortable questions in meetings, who point out the elephant in the room, who refuse to participate in office gossip or corporate doublespeak. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, understood that humans can endure almost any suffering if they can find meaning in it. But what happens when society systematically strips meaning from human experience? What happens when work becomes mere productivity, relationships become transactions, and existence becomes a series of distractions? The deep thinker feels this meaninglessness more acutely than others. They cannot simply phone it in or go through the motions. They need their lives to matter, their work to have purpose, their relationships to be authentic. In a world that often seems designed to prevent exactly these things, is it any wonder they feel alienated? The frequency of truth. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to operate on an entirely different wavelength? They speak a language that sounds like yours but carries meanings you can't quite grasp. They laugh at jokes that aren't funny, get excited about things that seem trivial, and remain unmoved by experiences that touch your soul. This isn't about intelligence or education, it's about frequency. Jung wrote extensively about the collective unconscious, that shared psychic space where humanity's deepest fears, desires, and archetypal patterns reside. He believed that most people live their entire lives without ever truly encountering their own unconscious material, content to follow scripts written by others and never questioning the fundamental assumptions that guide their existence. The deep thinker, however, has made contact with this deeper realm. They've touched something real beneath the surface of everyday consciousness. And once you've felt that authenticity, everything else feels like performance. It's like discovering color after living in a black and white world. You can't unsee the vibrancy, and you can't pretend that grayscale is enough. This creates what we might call the frequency problem. Deep thinkers vibrate at the frequency of truth, while much of society operates at the frequency of comfort. Truth is often uncomfortable, inconvenient, and disruptive. It asks us to look at things we'd rather ignore, to feel things we'd rather numb, to question things we'd rather take for granted. The Buddhist concept of Maya, the veil of illusion that obscures reality, speaks to this phenomenon. Most people live comfortably within Maya, accepting the illusion as reality, but the deep thinker has glimpsed behind the veil, and they can no longer participate in the collective pretense with the same unconscious ease. This doesn't make them superior, it makes them lonely. Imagine being the only person in a room who can see that the emperor has no clothes. Your truth-telling isn't welcomed. It's seen as disruptive, negative, or attention-seeking. You're not trying to be difficult, you're simply unable to participate in the collective denial. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato illustrated this perfectly in his famous allegory of the cave. Prisoners chained in a cave mistake shadows on the wall for reality until one breaks free and sees the world as it truly is. When he returns to share his discovery, the other prisoners reject his testimony and prefer their familiar shadows. The truth-teller becomes the outsider, the troublemaker, the one who disturbs the peace. But here's what Plato understood that many miss. The freed prisoner has a responsibility to keep trying, to keep speaking truth, even when it's unwelcome. Not because he enjoys being rejected, but because truth itself has value, and someone must bear witness to it. The deep thinker carries this burden of witness. They see through the masks people wear, the systems that exploit, the beliefs that limit. They feel the collective pain that others have learned to ignore. They carry the questions that others have stopped asking, and while this can be overwhelming, it's also profoundly important.
Oh, river, hear my heart, it's breaking in the midnight rain. Please, oh river, hear my heart, it's breaking in the midnight rain. She's gone, and her shadow's carving me, flowing with this endless aching pain. Don't let the current drown my tears. Don't let the darkness swallow my fears. Please, sweet river, carry my sorrow downstream. My soul's torn apart, crying to the river for a dream.
The emotional sponge. Picture this. You walk into a room and immediately sense that something is wrong. The conversation is light, everyone is smiling, but there's an undercurrent of tension you can almost taste. Others seem oblivious, chatting happily about weekend plans, but you feel like you're drowning in unspoken emotions. Welcome to the world of the deep thinker, where emotional boundaries are often as porous as Swiss cheese. Jung identified this phenomenon as part of what he called psychological contagion, the unconscious transmission of emotions and psychological states between individuals. While everyone experiences this to some degree, deep thinkers seem to have their emotional antennae permanently extended, picking up signals from every direction. Dr. Judith Orloff, a psychiatrist who has extensively studied empaths and sensitive individuals, describes this as being an emotional sponge. Deep thinkers don't just observe emotions, they absorb them. They feel the anxiety of the stressed colleague, the sadness of the friend going through a divorce, the anger of the stranger on the subway, and often they mistake these absorbed emotions for their own. This absorption isn't voluntary. It's not a conscious choice to take on others' emotional burdens. It's more like having a radio that can't be turned off, constantly tuning into emotional frequencies whether you want to or not. The result is exhaustion, a deep soul-level tiredness that can't be cured by sleep. But here's where it gets even more complex. Society has learned to use this sensitivity. People are drawn to deep thinkers like moths to flame. They sense, often unconsciously, that here is someone who will really listen, who will understand, who will hold space for their pain. And so the deep thinker becomes the unofficial therapist, the emotional dumping ground, the one who always has time for other people's problems. The irony is devastating. The very people who most need emotional support, who carry the weight of their own deep feelings, plus the absorbed emotions of others, are the ones everyone else turns to for comfort. It's like asking someone who's already drowning to save others from drowning. Psychologist Dr. Karen Hall writes about the concept of emotional labor, the invisible work of managing emotions, both our own and others. Deep thinkers perform enormous amounts of emotional labor, often without recognition or reciprocation. They're the ones who remember anniversaries, who check in on friends going through difficult times, who notice when someone is struggling and offer support. But when they need support themselves, they often find that others don't know how to provide it. The deep thinker's emotional needs are complex, nuanced, and often difficult to understand. They can't be fixed with platitudes or surface-level reassurances. They need to be truly seen, understood, and met at their level of depth. This creates what we might call emotional asymmetry in relationships. The deep thinker gives profoundly, but struggles to receive at the same level. They become skilled at supporting others, but often feel like they're speaking a foreign language when trying to express their own needs. The result is a particular kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being misunderstood. It's the loneliness of carrying thoughts and feelings that seem too complex or intense for others to handle. It's the loneliness of always being the strong one, the wise one, the one who has it all figured out, when inside you're often just as lost and confused as everyone else. The mask of normalcy. There's a moment in every deep thinker's life when they realize they're different. Not special, different. It usually happens gradually through a series of small rejections, confused looks, and uncomfortable silences. The realization that their natural way of being in the world is somehow wrong, too much, inappropriate, and so begins the careful construction of what we might call the mask of normalcy. This isn't conscious deception, it's survival. The deep thinker learns to modulate their voice, to choose their words carefully, to gauge the emotional temperature of every room before speaking. They become skilled at reading people not out of manipulation, but out of necessity. The mask serves multiple purposes. It protects the deep thinker from rejection and allows them to move through society with less friction. But it also protects others from the discomfort of encountering genuine depth. The mask is a kind of emotional diplomacy, a way of saying, don't worry, I won't make you feel things you don't want to feel. But masks are exhausting to maintain. They require constant vigilance, constant performance, constant denial of one's authentic self. The deep thinker learns to laugh at jokes they don't find funny, to express enthusiasm for things that bore them, to hide their reactions to the cruelty and superficiality they witness daily. The existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about bad faith, the ways we lie to ourselves to avoid the anxiety of authentic existence. But for the deep thinker, the mask isn't about avoiding their own authenticity. It's about making their authenticity palatable to others. They know exactly who they are. They just can't always afford to show it. This creates a split in the deep thinker's sense of self. There's the private self, complex, questioning, feeling, and the public self, agreeable, simple, safe. The energy required to maintain this split is enormous, and it leads to what psychologists call masking fatigue. The deep thinker often feels like they're living a double life, authentic in private but performative in public. The tragedy is that this masking often backfires. While it may help the deep thinker avoid some rejection, it also prevents them from forming the deep connections they crave. How can you be truly known if you're always hiding your true self? How can you find your tribe if you're constantly pretending to be someone else? Yet the alternative, dropping the mask entirely, can feel impossibly risky. The deep thinker has learned, often through painful experience, that their unfiltered self is too much for most people to handle. They've seen how their intensity can overwhelm, how their questions can threaten, how their depth can isolate. This is the deep thinker's catch-22. They need authentic connection to thrive. But their authenticity often drives people away. They need to be seen and understood, but their true self seems to make others uncomfortable. They need community, but they struggle to find others who can match their depth. The collective unconscious conspiracy. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious suggests that beneath our individual minds lies a shared psychic space containing the archetypal patterns and primordial images that shape human experience. But what happens when the collective unconscious becomes infected with fear of depth, authenticity, and genuine feeling? We live in what many psychologists and sociologists call a post-truth society. Not because truth doesn't exist, but because we've collectively decided that comfort is more important than accuracy. We've created systems that reward appearance over substance, performance over authenticity, and agreement over truth-telling. The deep thinker finds themselves in opposition to this collective agreement. They're like the child in the fairy tale who points out that the emperor has no clothes, except instead of being celebrated for their honesty, they're shushed, marginalized, or labeled as negative. Consider the modern workplace, where emotional intelligence is praised in theory, but punished in practice. The deep thinker who points out toxic dynamics, who questions unethical practices, or who refuses to participate in office politics is often labeled as not a team player or difficult to work with. The very qualities that make them valuable, their integrity, their insight, their unwillingness to compromise their values, become liabilities in systems that prioritize compliance over consciousness. The educational system provides another example. From an early age, children are taught to value the right answer over the right question. They're rewarded for memorization and compliance, not for critical thinking or creative exploration. The deep thinker child who naturally questions assumptions and seeks understanding rather than just information often struggles in these environments. Social media amplifies this phenomenon by creating echo chambers where complexity is reduced to sound bites and nuance is sacrificed for virality. The deep thinker's natural inclination toward nuanced thinking and complex analysis doesn't translate well to platforms designed for quick consumption and instant gratification. But perhaps most insidiously, the collective unconscious has developed what we might call depth phobia, a fear of psychological and emotional depth. We've created a culture that medicates discomfort, distracts from pain, and pathologizes sadness. We've learned to fear our own inner lives, to avoid the very introspection that might lead to growth and authenticity. The deep thinker, who naturally gravitates toward introspection and emotional complexity, finds themselves swimming against this cultural current. They're told they're overthinking when they're actually thinking clearly. They're accused of being too sensitive when they're responding appropriately to genuine stimuli. They're labeled as negative when they're simply refusing to participate in toxic positivity. This creates a kind of gaslighting effect, where the deep thinker begins to doubt their own perceptions and experiences. They start to wonder if they really are too much, too sensitive, too complicated. They begin to internalize the collective rejection of depth and question whether their way of being in the world is somehow wrong. The paradox of visibility. Here's a curious paradox that many deep thinkers experience. They simultaneously feel invisible and exposed. Invisible because their inner world, rich with complex thoughts, deep emotions, and nuanced understanding, remains largely unseen by others. Exposed because their sensitivity makes them vulnerable to every slight, every rejection, every moment of misunderstanding. This paradox creates a particular kind of psychological tension. The deep thinker longs to be seen and understood, to have their inner world acknowledged and appreciated. Yet they also fear the vulnerability that comes with true visibility. They've learned that showing their depth often leads to rejection, so they've developed sophisticated strategies for hiding in plain sight. The Greek concept of kenosis, a self-emptying or self-concealment, captures something of this experience. The deep thinker often empties themselves of their own needs and complexity in order to be more accessible to others. They become skilled at making themselves smaller, dimmer, less threatening. But this self-concealment comes at a cost. The deep thinker begins to lose touch with their own voice, their own needs, their own truth. They become so skilled at reading and responding to others that they forget how to listen to themselves. They become experts at emotional camouflage, blending into whatever environment they find themselves in. The irony is that this very adaptability, born from the need to survive in a world that doesn't understand them, often makes them even more invisible. They become chameleons, so skilled at becoming what others need them to be that they lose sight of who they actually are. This creates what we might call the authenticity trap. The deep thinker knows that authenticity is essential for meaningful connection, but they've learned that their authentic self is often too much for others to handle. So they find themselves caught between the rock of loneliness and the hard place of rejection. The solution, if there is one, lies not in becoming less authentic, but in becoming more discerning about where and with whom to share that authenticity. The deep thinker must learn to distinguish between environments that can hold their depth and those that cannot. They must learn to save their pearls for those who can appreciate their value. The wounded healer. Jung wrote extensively about the archetype of the wounded healer, the person who has been broken by life's challenges, but transforms that brokenness into a source of healing for others. Many deep thinkers embody this archetype, carrying within themselves both profound wounds and profound wisdom. The deep thinker's wounds often come from a lifetime of feeling misunderstood, rejected, or too much for the world around them. They've been told to dim their light, to quiet their voice, to stop asking inconvenient questions. They've experienced the pain of authentic connection, being met with discomfort or rejection. But these very wounds become sources of compassion and insight. The deep thinker who has felt the sting of rejection becomes skilled at creating safe spaces for others. The one who has been misunderstood becomes gifted at truly seeing and hearing others. The one who has been too much learns to hold space for others' intensity. This transformation from wounded to healer isn't automatic or easy. It requires what Jung called individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of the self, including the shadow parts we'd rather deny. The deep thinker must learn to embrace their sensitivity as a strength, their intensity as a gift, their depth as a treasure. But they must also learn to set boundaries, to protect their own well-being, to refuse to be drained by others' needs. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the wounded healer's journey, learning to give without depleting themselves, to love without losing themselves. The deep thinker as wounded healer offers something unique to the world. They provide depth in a shallow culture, authenticity in a performative society, and genuine connection in an increasingly disconnected world. They serve as bridges between the conscious and unconscious, the spoken and unspoken, the felt and unfelt. The alchemy of solitude. Solitude and loneliness are often conflated, but they're fundamentally different experiences. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected from others. Solitude is the joy of being connected to yourself. For the deep thinker, learning to distinguish between these states is crucial for psychological survival. The deep thinker often finds themselves alone, not by choice, but by circumstance. Their depth can intimidate others, their intensity can overwhelm, their questions can threaten. They may find themselves excluded from social circles, passed over for shallow connections, or simply misunderstood in groups. But within this enforced solitude lies a hidden gift. Away from the constant pressure to perform normalcy, the deep thinker can finally breathe. They can think their deep thoughts, feel their complex emotions, and explore their inner landscape without fear of judgment or rejection. Solitude becomes a sanctuary where the deep thinker can reconnect with their authentic self. It's where they can process the constant input they receive from the world, where they can untangle their own emotions from the ones they've absorbed from others, where they can remember who they are beneath all the masks and adaptations. The medieval mystics understood this well. They spoke of the dark night of the soul, a period of spiritual dryness and apparent abandonment that ultimately leads to deeper connection with the divine. For the deep thinker, periods of solitude and apparent isolation can serve a similar function, stripping away the superficial to reveal the essential. But this alchemical process requires intention and skill. The deep thinker must learn to transform loneliness into solitude, isolation into introspection, rejection into self-acceptance. They must learn to be good company to themselves, to find in their own depth the connection they seek from others. This doesn't mean becoming hermits or giving up on human connection. Rather, it means developing such a strong relationship with themselves that they can afford to be selective about their connections with others. When you're no longer desperate for acceptance, you can wait for genuine understanding. The frequency of finding. The question that haunts many deep thinkers is, where are my people? After years of feeling like aliens in their own culture, they wonder if there are others like them, others who think deeply, feel intensely, and question constantly. The good news is that these people exist. The challenging news is that finding them requires both patience and courage. Deep thinkers are drawn to certain environments and activities. They gravitate toward bookstores and libraries, art galleries and museums, coffee shops and quiet corners. They're attracted to philosophy and psychology, literature and poetry, spiritual practices and healing arts. They seek out documentaries over sitcoms, depth over entertainment, meaning over distraction. But even in these environments, deep thinkers often remain hidden. They've learned to camouflage their intensity, to moderate their depth, to test the waters before revealing their true selves. This means that finding other deep thinkers requires a kind of emotional sonar, the ability to sense depth beneath surface interactions. The signs are subtle but recognizable. It's the person who asks follow-up questions, who seems genuinely curious about your inner world, who isn't satisfied with surface-level answers. It's the one who references books you've never heard of, who notices things others miss, who seems to carry a certain weight of awareness. When two deep thinkers recognize each other, there's often an immediate sense of relief and recognition. Finally, someone who speaks the same language, who doesn't need things explained or simplified, who can match their intensity and depth. These connections, while rare, are profoundly nourishing. But deep thinkers must also learn to appreciate different types of relationships. Not everyone needs to be a soulmate or philosophical companion. Some relationships can be based on shared activities, others on mutual support, still others on simple companionship. The key is not expecting everyone to meet every need, but rather cultivating a network of relationships that, together, provide the richness and depth the deep thinker requires. The revolutionary act of authenticity. In a world that profits from our insecurity, being authentic becomes a revolutionary act. The deep thinker who refuses to dim their light, who asks uncomfortable questions, who insists on meaning over appearance, poses a threat to systems built on compliance and consumption. Consider how much of our economy depends on people feeling inadequate. The beauty industry thrives on insecurity about appearance. The self-help industry profits from our sense of inadequacy. The entertainment industry succeeds by keeping us distracted from our own lives. The deep thinker who has found peace with themselves, who values substance over style, who seeks meaning over entertainment, represents a challenge to these systems. This is why authentic deep thinkers often find themselves marginalized or labeled as difficult. They refuse to play the game that keeps everyone else distracted and compliant. They ask the questions that expose the emperor's nakedness. They feel the feelings that everyone else has learned to numb. But this refusal to conform isn't about being contrary or rebellious for its own sake. It's about integrity, the integration of inner truth with outer expression. The deep thinker cannot live a lie, cannot pretend to value what they don't value, cannot perform happiness when they feel sadness. This integrity is both their burden and their gift. It's a burden because it makes them aliens in their own culture, outsiders in their own society. But it's also a gift because it allows them to serve as witnesses to truth, as guardians of depth, as bridges between the conscious and unconscious. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote about the leap of faith, the decision to believe despite uncertainty. For the deep thinker, there's a similar leap required, the leap of authenticity, the decision to be themselves despite the risks, to speak their truth despite the consequences, to value depth despite the world's preference for surface. This leap requires tremendous courage. It means accepting that they may be misunderstood, rejected, or isolated. It means choosing truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, depth over ease. But it also means the possibility of genuine connection, meaningful work, and a life lived in alignment with their deepest values. The ripple effect. The deep thinker's influence extends far beyond their immediate circle. Like a stone thrown into still water, their authenticity creates ripples that spread outward in ways they may never fully see or understand. Their refusal to participate in collective unconsciousness gives others permission to wake up. Their commitment to depth creates space for others to explore their own inner worlds. This influence is often subtle and indirect. The deep thinker may never know that their willingness to ask difficult questions inspired someone else to examine their own assumptions. They may never realize that their emotional honesty gave someone else permission to feel their own feelings. They may never understand that their authenticity served as a beacon for others struggling to find their own way. But the ripples are real. Every time a deep thinker chooses authenticity over performance, truth over comfort, depth over surface, they contribute to a larger awakening. They help create a culture that values substance over style, meaning over distraction, consciousness over unconsciousness. This is the deep thinker's ultimate calling, not to be understood by everyone, but to remain true to their own depth. Not to fix the world, but to refuse to participate in its collective denial. Not to be loved by all, but to love themselves enough to stay authentic. The world needs deep thinkers now more than ever. In an age of artificial intelligence and virtual reality, we need people who can think deeply and feel authentically. In a time of increasing polarization and decreasing nuance, we need voices that can hold complexity and ambiguity. In a culture that values speed over depth, we need those who are willing to slow down and think carefully. The invitation. If you recognize yourself in these words, if you feel the familiar ache of being too much in a world that prefers less, then this is your invitation. An invitation to stop apologizing for your depth, to stop shrinking to make others comfortable, to stop pretending that shallow is enough. You are not broken, you are not too much, you are not the problem. You are awake in a world that prefers sleep, conscious in a society that chooses unconsciousness, authentic in a culture that rewards performance. Your sensitivity is not a weakness, it's your superpower. Your depth is not a burden, it's your gift. Your intensity is not a problem, it's your strength. The world needs what you have to offer, even if it doesn't always know how to receive it. The path forward isn't about becoming less of who you are. It's about becoming more skilled at being who you are. It's about learning to distinguish between environments that can hold your depth and those that cannot. It's about finding your tribe while still maintaining compassion for those who aren't part of it. It's about learning to love yourself so deeply that the world's rejection cannot touch your core. It's about developing such a strong relationship with your own authenticity that you can afford to be patient with others' unconsciousness. It's about becoming so rooted in your own truth that you can weather any storm of misunderstanding. The deep thinker's journey is not an easy one. It requires courage, resilience, and a willingness to walk alone when necessary. But it also offers rewards that those who stay on the surface will never know. The joy of authentic connection, the satisfaction of meaningful work, the peace of living in alignment with your deepest values. You are not alone in this. Scattered across the world are others like you, also questioning, also feeling, also seeking depth in a shallow world. Some you will find, others will find you. Trust that your authenticity is a beacon that will attract those who can appreciate its light. The world may seem to prefer illusion, but deep down, it's crying out for truth. It may seem to reward performance, but secretly, it's hungry for authenticity. It may seem to value surface, but its soul is starving for depth. You are the answer to that hunger. You are the light in the darkness. You are the depth in the shallows. You are the truth in the illusion. Don't dim your light to make others comfortable. Don't shrink your truth to fit their comfort zones. Don't apologize for being exactly who you are. The world needs your questions, your feelings, your depth, your truth. It needs your refusal to accept easy answers, your insistence on meaning, your commitment to authenticity. It needs your beautiful, complicated, intense, magnificent self. So be yourself, fully, completely, unapologetically. The world may not always understand, but it will be forever changed by your presence. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. Be who we are, as deeply and authentically as possible, and trust that it's enough. Because it is. You are enough. You are more than enough. You are exactly what the world needs, even if it doesn't always know it. Welcome to the tribe of the awake. Welcome to the community of the conscious. Welcome to the fellowship of the deep. You are home.
Sooner you let my heart's torn in two. Sooner you let my nights cold and blue. Love is fake, but none hurt.
His reign ends now.
Like you.
Miserable creature.
Rain on my soul, your shadow won't part. Rain on my soul, it drowns my heart.
job's done.
The light shall burn you. The light shall burn you.
Almost out of time.
Let's make it uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Imagine that without knowing it, you've been carrying a curse your entire life. No, it's not witchcraft. It's not something esoteric. It's worse. It's something you carry inside, that breathes with you, that disguises itself as you. It's your shadow. That part that nobody sees but that pulls your strings. That part hiding behind every uncontrollable impulse, behind every decision that ruins everything just when it seemed to be going well. Do you feel it? That constant presence that you can't explain but that doesn't go away. Have you ever had the experience that in the middle of silence, you hear a voice in your head that isn't you but sounds exactly like you? That voice that whispers you will fail, that no one really loves you, that you are a burden, that you are too much or too little. Do you know what the trap is? That voice doesn't hate you, it protects you. But it does so from the womb. And you have mistaken that wound for your identity. You've gotten used to living on the edge of emotional collapse, without knowing why. To repeating habits that drag you down, to sabotaging what you love, to numbing what hurts, to pretending everything is fine while something inside you begs you to stop. Have you ever wondered why you do what you do when you're alone? Why you consume yourself with dark thoughts you don't share with anyone? Why you repeat self-destructive patterns, even when you know they are breaking you? It's not a lack of strength. It's not weakness. It's a code. A signal you've been ignoring so long it had to scream. Because your soul can no longer keep holding itself together with patches. And now I'm going to tell you something you may not be ready to hear. If you feel like you don't fit in, that everything affects you too much, that you live on a constant emotional roller coaster, it's because your aura isn't normal. It's extraordinarily rare, intensely striking, and that's a problem. Not for you, for others, because people like you don't go unnoticed. They feel you before they see you. Your very presence makes them uncomfortable. It stirs them. It wakes them up. Because you carry something ancient, dense. A truth that others have repressed so well that they no longer even remember it exists. And here's the real mystery. That energy, that sensitivity, that intensity, they are not system errors. They are internal alarms. Indicators that something essential in your life has been screaming for attention. And instead of listening, you've medicated it with distractions. You've created routines to avoid thinking. You've filled your life with noise so you won't hear the brutal whisper of your subconscious. But it doesn't go away, because it's not something you can eliminate. It's something you must integrate. And the more you deny it, the more it transforms into compulsions, into addictions, into toxic relationships, into chronic anxiety, into behaviors you don't even understand but can't stop, because they are your shadow trying to save you. And do you know what the darkest part of all this is? That no one taught you to see your pain as a message. They taught you to repress it, to feel ashamed of it, to mask it with productivity, to silence it with empty positive words. But here you are, and your shadow hasn't gone away. In fact, it's right behind you right now, watching you, waiting, not to destroy you, but so that finally you pay attention to it. This video is not for those who live asleep. It's for those who, like you, have started to suspect that what breaks them also guides them. We're not going to talk about easy solutions, nor cheap motivation. We're going to dive into what no one dares to look at. Your cycles, your impulses, your fears, your need to please, your emptiness, your anger. We're going to decipher the hidden language of your internal chaos. Because your chaos isn't random, it's logical, it's ancient, and it's brilliant. Your pain is not the enemy, it's the compass. Do you dare to look at what you've always avoided? Because once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. And then you'll have to choose, are you going to keep running from yourself? Or are you going to turn on the flashlight and go down to the basement where you hid everything you really are? Because only there, among the rubble of what you denied, your true power awaits you, silent, dark, immense, and hungry for truth. Perfect. I'll start this part over from scratch, horizontally, without poetic tone or broken verses. Here is the continuation of the video, fluid, intense, without losing the immersive tone and with a new approach fully linked to the main idea. Let's talk about something almost nobody touches. How uncomfortable it is to have consciousness. I'm not talking about moral conscience, nor about knowing right from wrong. I'm talking about that raw, relentless awareness that forces you to truly see yourself. The one that makes you question everything, even when others seem to float on the surface without worrying about anything. And yes, I know, it's exhausting, because when you see too much, you feel too much. And when you feel too much, you start building mechanisms so you don't collapse. The problem is those mechanisms are the same ones that end up disconnecting you from yourself. Have you noticed how this works? You begin to have behaviors you don't even understand. You isolate yourself without knowing why. You become addicted to things you don't even enjoy. You self-sabotage just when everything seems to be going well. But behind all that, there is no madness. There is poorly digested lucidity. Because when you have heightened sensitivity, reality doesn't enter your mind like it does for others. It comes in unfiltered, raw. Every word, every gesture, every silence is interpreted in 1,000 different layers. And that creates an overload that few understand. That's where compulsive patterns are born. Not from weakness, but from excess. You're not broken, you're overloaded. Your mind processes more, your body holds more, your heart endures more. Until it can't anymore. And then the vice appears. The repetitive behavior, the obsession, the escape. But here's the fucked up part. When you finally have that moment of relief, when you eat, drink, distract yourself, let loose, the system relaxes. And it interprets it as a solution. Even if it destroys you, and you who are conscious, you know it. But you can't avoid it. Because the mind doesn't respond to logic when what it needs is emotional relief. That's why repeating is not a choice, it's a response. And the harder you try to control it through willpower, the more it slips away. Because what you need is not more discipline, it's more understanding, more presence, more space to feel what you have repressed for years. And you know what makes it even more complex? While you fight against this internal whirlwind, from the outside everything seems fine. You have normal days, moments of calm, social appearances, and that makes even you doubt yourself. Am I exaggerating? Am I too dramatic? Why does everything affect me so much if my life isn't that bad? That's the trap. The self-deception you build when you start distrusting your own pain. But pain doesn't need permission to exist, nor justification. It just is. And that's enough. Now listen carefully, because this is important. The higher your level of emotional perception, the more sophisticated the ways you hide from yourself become. You no longer need drugs or visible excesses. Sometimes it's enough to fill yourself with busyness, to take care of everyone but yourself, to intellectualize everything, to say, I already worked on that, when really you just buried it under theories. What you do to escape is much more elegant than before, but just as destructive. And here comes the hardest concept of all. Your shadow is not only made up of what you don't like about yourself, it's also made up of everything you don't dare admit you do need, of the desires you judge, of the rage you disguise as calm, of the need to be seen, loved, validated, that you've learned to deny to seem self-sufficient. And the more you deny that, the stronger your unconscious urge to get it becomes. It's not that you lack control, it's that you lack permission. Permission to feel without filters, to get angry without guilt, to cry without explanations, to say, I need without shame. Because most of your patterns aren't there out of addiction to pleasure. They're there from emotional hunger, from unheard needs, from wounds that remain open, even though they have been scarred over for years on the surface. Do you want to know why breaking the cycle is so hard? Because pain, even if it destroys you, is also familiar. It's predictable. It's controllable. While well-being, calm, real connection feels strange to you, uncomfortable, suspicious. That's why, when things start going well, you ruin them. Not because you're stupid, not because you don't deserve it, but because the emotional system you've trained for years understands that good is dangerous. Because it exposes you. Because it makes you vulnerable. Because you don't know what to do with peace. And this is the deepest core of everything. Your system doesn't want happiness. It wants safety. And if safety was built in chaos, then that's what you'll seek, again and again. That's why it's hard for you to let go. That's why you repeat bonds with people who aren't good for you. That's why you become dependent on things you hate. Because your body interprets the familiar as safe, even if it hurts. So, it's not a matter of willpower. It's a matter of deep emotional reprogramming. And that reprogramming doesn't happen through force. It happens when you start honestly looking at everything you've avoided. When you start building internal spaces where you can feel without hiding. When you stop trying to prove something and start asking yourself, what part of me needs to be recognized? What emotion am I denying? What impulse am I judging so much that I'm unintentionally strengthening it? Your sensitivity, your intensity, your capacity to feel the world deeply are not system errors. They are the consequence of a mind that had to learn to survive in an unkind environment. And now, that same system is asking you for something else. Not to survive anymore, but to heal, to integrate, to return to yourself, without masks, without filters, without excuses, with all the rawness, rage, tenderness, and chaos that implies. Because in the end, the only truly revolutionary thing is daring to be yourself without anesthesia. And that is the hardest task, but also the only one that can truly free you. And just when you start to understand that the key isn't eliminating your impulses, but understanding them,
light shall burn you.
Another truth appears that completely unsettles you. You're not only fighting your current emotions, you're also carrying emotions that aren't yours. Invisible emotional inheritances. Burdens that didn't start with you, but that end up with you if you decide to do the work. Because yes, even if it sounds brutal, many of the emotions that overwhelm you weren't born in your story, but in that of your parents, your grandparents, your roots. And the worst part is that all of that is stored not in your head, but in your body. That anxiety that appears for no apparent reason. That deep sadness you don't understand where it comes from. That feeling of guilt for choosing yourself. Sometimes they're not yours. They are unconscious loyalties you learned without realizing it. As if your body were a kind of container for inherited emotions. They don't teach you this in school, nor do you see it in shiny self-help books. But you carry it inside. You live it raw every time you try to move forward and something invisible pulls you back. Has this happened to you? You decide to make a real change. You start taking care of yourself, setting boundaries, saying no. And suddenly you feel bad. As if you were betraying something. As if you were breaking a rule you don't remember agreeing to. That's called emotional memory. And it's not only in your personal history, it's in your lineage, and how your family learned to survive, and how your role models repressed, silenced, endured. You inherited that way of being in the world, and now when you try to do it differently, your internal system experiences it as a danger. And that's when many give up, because they believe pain means they're failing, when in reality, it means they are freeing themselves. Change doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like betrayal. Because you're breaking invisible pacts that held a sick but familiar balance. That's why moving forward hurts. Not because you're wrong, but because you're the first in your line to do things differently. And that has a price. You will feel lonely. You will feel misunderstood. You will feel like you're going crazy. But it's not madness. It's rupture. It's evolution. It's deep emotional cleansing. And no one applauds you for that. No one notices. But you feel it. You know it. You live it in your skin. So what can you do when everything you were starts to fall apart? The first thing is to understand that this isn't the end. It's the beginning. The exact moment when your identity begins to rebuild itself from what is real. From who you are, not from what you were taught to be. And here starts another equally challenging process. Rebuilding your self-esteem. But not that superficial self-esteem based on achievements, likes, social acceptance. I mean emotional self-esteem. The one based on knowing yourself deeply and still choosing yourself. The one that doesn't waver when you fail. The one that holds you when no one else does. And here comes the most interesting part. Most of us have a self-image created by how others looked at us. Parents, teachers, partners, friends. And over time, that image becomes a cage. Because we start living to maintain it. Not out of self-love, but out of fear of rejection. And that's the next big challenge. Breaking the image. Stopping trying to be the person others expect. And starting to be the person you really need. It's not easy, because that image is often tied to your sense of worth. If you learned that you only matter when you care for others, when you stay silent, when you don't bother, when you perform, then every time you prioritize yourself, you'll feel guilty. But that guilt is an illusion. You owe nothing to anyone for being you. You're not here to maintain the emotional balance of others at the cost of your own well-being. If your aura, your energy, your intensity make others uncomfortable, so be it. You didn't come to this world to be comfortable. You came to wake up, to transform, to break cycles. And now, listen carefully, because this goes straight to your nervous system. You don't need to be on alert all the time. You don't have to anticipate everything to avoid pain. You're no longer in danger, but your body doesn't know it yet. That's why it reacts like this, That's why you live with constant muscle tension. That's why you sleep poorly. That's why you eat without hunger or stop eating with anxiety. Because your body learned that being relaxed is synonymous with vulnerability. And here's the real work. Re-educate your system so it understands it no longer needs to defend itself against everything. This isn't achieved just with meditation, nor with affirmations in front of the mirror. It's achieved with repeated acts of self-love, with clear boundaries, with moments of pause where you can tell yourself, I'm safe. I don't have to run. I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to save anyone. And yes, at first you'll feel guilt, emptiness, even a kind of inexplicable sadness. But that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're cleansing. You're shedding layers you've carried since childhood. You're releasing weights that weren't yours. And when you start living from there, something changes. Your impulses calm down. Your compulsion dissolves. Not because you defeated it, but because you no longer need it. Because you're no longer running away. You're inhabiting yourself. You're listening to yourself. You're acting from connection, not from emptiness. And that's what no one teaches you. That when you learn to truly be with yourself, many of your battles fade away on their own. Your intensity doesn't go away, but it transforms. It becomes creative fire, direction, brutal authenticity. It's no longer a weapon that hurts you. It's a flame that guides you. And then you stop fighting yourself. You stop seeing your sensitivity as a burden. And you start seeing it for what it always was. A door, a compass, a profound way to understand the world and transform it. And that transformation starts with you. Here, now, where you can no longer pretend, where your soul demands truth, where your body begs for rest, where your story finally wants to be rewritten from consciousness and not from the wound. So don't cover it up. Don't deny it. Don't distract yourself. Look at it. Listen to it. Embrace it. Because in that part of yourself you fear the most lies everything you need to free yourself. And you are already ready, even if you don't know it yet. And now that we've made it this far, before we continue, I want to present the following to you. Our book, The Formula of Awakening, is now available. Do you feel like there's something inside you that wants to awaken, but you don't know where to start? Then I invite you to transform your way of thinking, and with it, your way of living. Discover who you can become. Start today. The link to get the ebook is in the first pinned comment of this video. Grab your copy now at a great price. With that said, let's continue with the video. And here is where things get really interesting. Because just when you think you've understood what's happening to you, just when you feel you're starting to unravel the emotional chaos you carry inside, something deeper appears, something many never discover. Beneath all your suffering, beneath your impulses, your emptiness, your anxiety, and your need for validation, there is a brutal force waiting to be unleashed. A force that doesn't resemble what they've sold you as self-esteem or empowerment. It's not an image of success, nor a perfect version of you. It's something much rawer, much more real. Your capacity to emotionally hold yourself without depending on external judgment. Without needing to be okay all the time. Without demanding yourself to be an optimized version of you every day. And when you discover that, when you start living from there, the spell breaks. Life stops feeling like a race to prove something. Your relationships change. Your way of working changes. Even your way of breathing changes. You no longer need to fight so much. You're no longer trying to fit in. You could start creating spaces where you can simply exist. And that, in this world, is a revolution. But there is one last trap, the most dangerous of all. And it is this: thinking that now that you understand everything, you will stop falling. Thinking that knowledge is immunity, that you will never again doubt yourself, sabotage yourself, or run from yourself. Lieutenant, you will keep falling. Because growth doesn't make you perfect, it makes you honest. You will repeat patterns again. You will feel anxiety again. You will have days where you don't understand anything you feel. And that's okay. Because now you don't run from yourself. Now you see yourself. You observe yourself. And you choose yourself again and again. That is the difference between a life lived from unconsciousness and a life lived from the truth. It's not that everything suddenly gets better. It's that you stop demanding yourself to always be okay in order to deserve love, respect, or rest. It's that you give yourself permission to be human, complete, contradictory, intense, and free. And here comes the final part, the one only those who make it this far can understand. Your shadow is not what stops you from moving forward. Your shadow is what's pushing you to wake up. Every time you overflow, every time you collapse, every time you feel like you can't take it anymore, it's not the end. It's the body saying, "Enough ignoring me, listen to me, I need to heal." And when you finally do, when instead of numbing yourself, you decide to breathe with what is, that's when your internal revolution begins. That's when your true life begins. So if you've made it this far, if you've felt every word as if I were speaking only to you, let me tell you something. It's no coincidence. You're ready. You're on the exact edge where something inside you no longer wants to go back. And if this video has stirred something in you, if it has given you a clue, a truth, or even an emotional punch you needed, subscribe, but not for me. Do it for yourself. Because here, we're not going to talk about the superficial. Here we're going to keep digging, dismantling, revealing what others don't even dare to mention. And let me read you in the comments. If you truly connected with this message, write, "My shadow no longer scares me." That way I'll know you made it here, that you're not running away, that you're awake. And now, yes, I say goodbye. But not with a pretty phrase, not with a typical conclusion. I say goodbye with a question that will haunt you much more than any advice. Who would you be if you stopped fighting against yourself? See you in the next abyss, or in your next awakening you choose.
The void is filled with many whispers.
Fall before the imp's gambit!
quickly.